The suspension of a dirt bike or ATV or off-road vehicle like this is basically shock absorbers. And their job is to maintain the bike's control on the road by keeping the wheels in contact with the ground as much as possible, while absorbing bumps and impacts. So this makes your ride comfortable and allows you to maintain control and traction. Shock absorber is made up of two primary parts: the spring or coil spring and the damper. The spring provides resistance to force pushing the wheel up and pushes the wheel back down to maintain contact with the ground, which of course helps you maintain traction on the ground. But springs can expand and contract violently and quickly. Think of a slinky, the kid's toy that you can spring in and out quickly. Also about springs, the thicker the spring is, the higher the load capacity, and also the more windings you have in the spring. So a spring is rated by how many pounds of force, or if you're using metric, how many kilos of force, it can absorb to compress, but we're going to talk here in pounds. So how many pounds of force it can absorb up to 400 pounds to compress by 1 inch. Okay, and the shock absorber, the second major part is the damper. And that is the part that really absorbs not only shock in the spring here, but helps to control the spring's action. And the word is damper, not dampener. I've confused these words before myself. So damper, there's two types we're going to talk about. This one is an oil damper. Inside there is a volume, a certain amount of oil, and it absorbs energy and controls the speed of the compression of the spring. And you can vary this amount of compression a couple of ways. One is using a higher viscosity or thicker oil. The thicker it is, the slower the oil will move inside of this area. And the second is to vary the volume of this space. And some shocks have dials and little controls that you can actually lock off parts of this trapped space for the oil to move, and that will actually vary the damping rate. You can think of it like here in this picture. Okay, first of all, we had the spring we mentioned. Spring can bounce up and down, but there's nothing really controlling it. But then if we have here like a plunger, let's say this is like a big syringe. We have inside of here oil or even water. We have a trapped amount of water. If you have a second syringe connected, okay, another empty area of space connected by a tube, when you push down, the fluid's got to go somewhere, and it ends up over here. If this is sealed off, it's going to be compressed, and this slows down the motion of the spring. If you opened up a bigger area, then you get more motion of the spring. So that's your variable damping. And there's a second type of damping, and that's called the air damper. Basically works the same way, but instead of using oil or hydraulic fluid, we're using a trapped amount of air, or actually it's gas, some kind of gas, usually nitrogen filled. So there's a trapped amount of air inside this chamber, and just like the oil moved through, air moves through. So it's the same way these big excavators and diggers work with hydraulic. They're using a certain amount of fluid, whether it's air or oil, to compress or decompress. So air dampers work the same way. Generally, oil is a little bit more controlled. So we had the spring itself, and we had the damper, and let's talk about the materials. So the spring, there's qualities of steel, of course. There's also the windings, how many windings, and even the thickness of each coil. So like this one, I think here is a 9 millimeter. Some are thinner, some are thicker. The thickness and the winding, of course, gives you more resistance in the spring rate. Another thing, some springs have, this one doesn't have it, but some have like a dial here that can actually tighten down the total spring travel. So they call that adjustable spring rate. And then we got to look at the materials. Even in this part here is called a head cover, and the spring seat. This is a good solid steel construction, chrome plated, so it holds up against wear and corrosion. There's also this rubber bushing here. So again, even in the materials and the way that they're built, this is a superior shock compared to some others. Also, I'll show you here, these two, you see one has a longer coil than another. There's two parts to that. One is about the spacing on the bike, and second is this has a thicker coil and this has a thinner coil. Probably they're rated the same because the thicker one has more resistance, but the longer one is longer, which provides similar resistance. So it's technical, but in the end, you're probably achieving the same goal here. Okay, and all those things that we talked about, there's a company called Rutu Powersports, and they produce these premium shock absorbers. They produce for several other brands. You can find all those brands, or most of them, on Amazon.com. Check below this video for some links, and please don't forget to thumbs up, like our videos, and subscribe so you can keep apprised of more coming up soon. We have all kinds of stuff. Yesterday, I rode in a really cool full-size go-kart in the dirt for 3 hours. Watch that video, should come up by next week.